Hey guys, this video is going to be a bit different from my usual uploads. You can tell because, well, first of all, it's me here. Usually I don't have my model or my face cam on for these videos, but this video is going to be a bit different. It's not going to be a guide, it's going to be a little bit more informational and kind of like a video essay. And this comes about because of recently Choice. If you know who Choice is, he's one of the biggest video streamers and content creators in the game and in the scene. And him and some of the other larger content creators made a podcast in which they discussed the state of Black Desert. And these videos aren't anything new. People have done them in the past. Normally, when these kinds of things are made, I would just let them have their conversation, keep to myself, maybe listen to it, see what my opinions on it would be, and just kind of like, just see what goes on. But after doing some thinking this time around, I realized that me not really saying anything is the equivalent of letting them speak for me when it comes to how the game could be improved because I'm not letting my thoughts be known. So the only thing the devs or anyone else has to go off of is from what they've said. So this time around, I'm not just going to be a spectator. I'm going to try and be involved in the conversation, which is why I'm making this video. So in this video, I'm going to discuss how I feel about all those aspects of the game that were discussed in Choice's podcast. And his video will also be linked in the description, by the way. So if you want to see exactly how they feel about it and how they feel about the current state of the game and stuff, you can check all that out as well by checking down the description and clicking that link. And as always, I will have timestamps throughout the video. So if you just want to hear my thoughts on specific things, you can check the description as well to skip around. Just keep in mind that this is a coherent piece, so if you skip around, you may miss some context on certain things. But as usual, without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the new region, Edania, and the state of PvE after its release. So, in my opinion, overall, Edania is a good expansion, the strongest part of which is probably the storyline, even though that's hard to believe. The story in this expansion is the best, most well written one I've experienced so far since I started playing BDO. So, if there's one thing I think the expansion did right, it's the story. As far as the grind spots go, they really aren't anything to write home about. It's just more of the standard grind spots we've experienced with slightly different mechanics. I do still think the spots are enjoyable. I'm not saying the new spots aren't fun, but they aren't anything to write home about. They're not fun or exciting enough to get to the point where it's like I'm blown away by their design. They're groundbreaking. They're unbelievable, right? They're just good. They're fun. They are what they are. They're kind of what we can expect from grind spots. It is what it is. And again, this at its core isn't a bad thing, as like I said, they aren't enjoyable, but them not being anything exciting and truly new does put a bit of a damper on the expansion for some players, which is understandable. In the podcast, they mentioned tower spots being too common and just overdone. But I feel like realistically, at this point in the game, so many different grind spots exist that the question really becomes, can they really make anything else that is unique enough to feel fresh? I mean, yeah, they could go back to pack spots, but at the end of the day, that's just the same old, just being brought back. It'll feel fresh for a little bit, but then, people will get sick of it eventually. There is one area, however, when it comes to grind zones, that has remained largely untouched, and that is group grind spots. This has been a hot topic recently, even before the podcast that Choice made, and it's something that I also wish PA would make more of. There was a recommendation in the podcast for a scalable system that increases the difficulty of spots based on how many players are currently in combat there, up until a cap of a full party, for example. And while this is simple and is a decent idea, I feel like this, at the end of the day, will be extremely boring and underwhelming. This is basically the bad way of increasing difficulty in games by bloating enemy stats, and I feel like it should not be done. If the spots do scale, it should be through the addition of mechanics that actually change how the spot functions instead. However, even this could be problematic as these spots with multiple versions are essentially Dekia spots, are they not? The player base did make it very clear that they do not like Dekia spots, so I feel like the developers probably would shy away from doing that. I do feel like, though, if it meant more group spots became available, players would probably put up with more scaling spots and then kind of going back to the whole Dekia system, just because that's how badly some people want group spots. I do have more I want to say and discuss on group spots, but that's not really relevant for this current section of the video. So just keep watching, and later on we'll come back around to this and we'll see how it plays into some of the other stuff I'm going to move on to discuss. So moving on to the next topic I wanted to talk about is the bosses in Edania. The general consensus here is that the fights are way too easy, and I do agree with that. I enjoy it when games are hard and have challenging things in them, but I'm not dumb. I know that I'm most likely in the minority when it comes to wanting things that are actually really hard to complete, especially for things like progression. But the crazy thing is, there's a solution that makes everyone happy, and it's a problem that was already solved back in Land of the Morning Light with the Calamity system. I don't think anyone really disliked how the difficulty system worked in Land of the Morning Light, so I'm truly shocked and surprised that the new bosses didn't have any type of scaling difficulties. Like, we had a good system, it made everyone happy, the sweats could get their challenge, and the players who just want rewards could get what they wanted. Why did we not just do that again? It just makes no sense. I don't know why the bosses are the way they are right now. It feels like maybe they were just rushed out, or I don't know. There's also been talk about the story versions of the fights themselves being way too easy for how these characters and beings were built up as essentially demigods, like these crazy powerful things that no one can beat. They're just insanely strong. And while I do think it would be cool for even the story fights to have some kind of challenge to them, in the long run, I do think this is just a bad idea, as most players don't care for that in this game and they just want to experience the story, or in the more likely case, just spam R. A difficulty option before the fight could work that would make the fight be in the form of the calamity difficulties instead of the story difficulty, but I feel like unless there is some reward for actively opting into a harder version of the story fight, what's the point of it out of just the satisfaction of, hey, I did it? So maybe they could add a unique title or something to flex which version of the story you did. Could be a nice option for players to show the achievement you made by completing that fight in a more difficult way. And this next point does contain potential story spoilers when it comes to the boss fights. So skip forward maybe like 30 seconds to a minute if you want to avoid the spoiler. But Edania Part 2 will most likely have the gods of BDO be the main antagonists, as at the end of Part 1's story, it is revealed that all the gods in the world have submitted to Hadum and likely have been corrupted, which means they're all evil now. And this plays into the whole "we are the god slaying king" aspect of the story, which was very prevalent in the Part 1 expansion. So I really hope that if we do end up fighting actual gods, that they do make them extremely challenging and not as much of a letdown as the current bosses are. The state of grind zones and boss fights is one thing, but at the end of the day, it is why we do them and what motivates us to do them that matters. I am, of course, talking about getting better gear. In my opinion, gear progression in BDO is only getting worse, and with the release of Edania, the gear progression is probably the worst it has ever been. The first and biggest offender to me is time gated progression. While time gating progression was not introduced with Edania, it's nothing new. It's never been this extreme. Time gating started back in Land of the Morning Light, and we never really saw any increase or desire to go back to time gating after it was released. We had multiple updates and expansions where time gating just wasn't a thing. Clearly, I was wrong though, as they took time gating to the extreme with Edania. At least in Land of the Morning Light, you would get a pretty decent amount of taps per week. You maybe get like 36 taps a week if you did all the bosses. But with Edania, the most you can get is 5 taps a week. And that is only for players approaching the gear cap. The vast majority of the player base will be getting around 1 to 3 taps a week, which really feels bad. Time gating in BDO, in my opinion, completely goes against the philosophy of what the game originally had when it came to gearing. BDO has always allowed you to grind for what you want for as long as you want. How quickly you progress was completely based on how much time you put into the game. This is one of the reasons I have yet to quit the game, as it did not devolve into do your dailies and your weeklies and then log off. You could always have something to do in the game no matter what. That is one of the major things that sets BDO apart from other games. It is not a theme park MMO. Stop trying to make it one, man. The players that enjoy those games are not your target audience. The other thing that is a main complaint with gear progression for me is that endgame players feel like there's nothing to grind for. And in Edania, there are endgame items, right? You get your 1,000 end times, you get your heralds, and then you're done. That's it. Those are your endgame. That's your endgame grind. And now this sounds like a grind in any other MMO, right? Company adds item, player completes item, and the cycle continues, right? It's just a gear treadmill. The problem isn't that there are no new items to go for. It's that chase items in BDO no longer exist. In the current state of the game, the only real chase item is not even an item, it's an enhancement level. Specifically, trying to go from knob to deck items is what I'm talking about. Simply chasing an enhancement is significantly less fun to go for, in my opinion, as now you are no longer grinding for the dopamine of a rare drop, but just for raw silver so you can buy crons, so you can do your taps. This makes grinding more boring and feel more monotonous, in my opinion. In the past, our chase item was Deboreka accessories. These accessories were extremely difficult to get, and also, when they were still chase items, were not required for anything in the game. They were just bonus stats you could get to do what you could already do, but slightly better. Of course, at their core, MMOs are geared treadmills, so eventually Debos would have to stop being these chase items, right? And they would become the norm and be required for content in the future, right? That's fine, that's how MMOs work, that's what I expect, that's what everyone should expect. But the problem is no new chase item was added to the game to replace these. If you think the end time or herald grind is enough to replace that type of grind, you are horribly wrong. Let's do some math. My current average for end times is I get around 6 per hour with where I grind at. So if we assume I want around 1,000 end times for what I want to make, that means it would take me around 167 hours of grinding. If we go back in time to when Debos were chase items, you would get a Debo maybe once every 3 hours. So if we grind for the same 167 hours, that means I would end up with 55 Deberekas. This is enough for maybe 1 or 2 pen attempts. So this means the entire endgame item grind in Edania in the past would have gotten you a couple attempts at best of getting a single chase item that endgame players were going for. That means with average luck, a single pen Debo getting that chase item would take around 5 times longer than the entire endgame grind in Edania. Now imagine that, but there's 6 Deberekas you could go for. That is an insanely long grind. And I know that sounds horrible. People don't always want to do that long grinds. It's a very small it's a very small minority of people that actively are doing those kinds of grinds. But you have to remember, devos were not required or needed for anything. They were just these extra super difficult, crazy rare, and difficult items to go for. Adding these chase items to the game again is something I really hope they do, because it is something that endgame players need. Your hardcore endgame player base wants those kinds of things to go for, and just not adding them just takes away from the dopamine they used to go for when they grinded. And to summarize my opinion here, what is currently wrong with gear progression is it is becoming too focused on time gating, and there's just no true endgame items to grind for. An enhancement level feels a lot less satisfying than grinding for an item, so I really hope they change how they do that in the future. All of the changes I have discussed so far hint at PA trying to turn BDO into your typical mainstream theme park MMO. This is not what BDO was originally designed to be, and is for me, as I am sure is for many other players, the reason that I enjoy the game and have yet to quit it. Like I said earlier, every time I have quit an MMO, it has been because it always devolves into dailies and weeklies, and that's it. I feel like I'm just doing chores. There's nothing else to do besides that. It sucks. There is no way to play the game beyond those things. BDO is different. It is not a theme park MMO. It is a sandbox MMO. BDO has been moving away from this ever since they killed open world PvP with the guild deck system changing, removing the ability to declare war on anyone whenever you want. Something I often say they have done is made a sandbox and then decided they want to take all the sand out of it. So all we have now is just an empty box. Nothing fun in it to play with, right? And as much as some may hate to admit it, it was the old state of PvP before the war deck changes that really made the sandbox be, well, a sandbox. It made it so that you never knew exactly what would happen at your grind spot. It made players actively go out and grind together to help defend their spots. It let players create their own conflicts and interguild storylines. Players actually were able to interact in the open world with each other. Now, while I personally would love to see the return of open world PvP in its original state, I know that I am massively in the minority here. I get it, and I do think overall the changes with the war deck system were probably for the best. However, the fact that that is all they did is remove that is the problem. They took the sand out of the sandbox and didn't give us any new sand to play with. With open world PvP dead, the sandbox isn't there anymore. Players are no longer interacting with each other outside of instance content. They need to add more sandbox elements back into the game to bring back that original feeling of the world being more interactive, more alive. One thing that they tried out, for example, was the abandoned monastery grind zone, where eventually the entire channel would get a notification of the boss at the spot spawning, which actively gave players a reason to go there and interact with each other to try to get the kill on that boss, get the credit for it, and get the items it drops. Another one is Muralwax Labyrinth, which had players work together in a grind spot to spawn a boss that they would then defeat together. We may have lost the PvP sandbox, but why can't we replace it with a PvE one instead? This goes back to what I was saying earlier, where I mentioned I have some more I wanted to talk on group grind spots, and this is exactly what I mean. Let's make the group grind spots more of a sandbox. I have an examples for you. So imagine if at Orbita, which is one of the new grind zones, if you don't know, that spot consists of 6 totems around a central large totem. Okay? Imagine if each player would grind at only one totem in what a rotation now consists of. And after a fixed period of time that a totem is active, a boss would spawn at the large central totem. The difficulty and drop rates of this boss would be based on how many mobs were killed, or maybe how many times a mechanic was successful at one of the central totem or the surrounding totems. The boss kill would not be about increasing the trash loot too much, but be about getting the rare drops to drop with as high a chance as possible. You could then have other players roll up to the grind spot, see you grinding one of the totems, and then join in at one of the other totems that no one's at. This would then mean you have two players grinding at totems in the spot, which increases how many mobs were killed or how many mechanics were successful between the boss spawns. And this makes the boss scale further because more was done in between the spawns. And when the boss scales up, not only does it get more health, maybe more damage, maybe some new mechanics, it would also get higher drop rates. So you would get better items and be more likely to get good items from the boss. Players, if this kind of spot was created, would be working together in a sandbox style grind spot to achieve a common goal of amping up the boss as much as possible for the best drops for the whole group. On top of that, we could take this one step further even. What if every time a boss dies in the rotations throughout the entire grind zone, it adds to a counter, and eventually, after enough bosses are killed, it spawns a world boss version of Enslar herself. So you have individual groups of players working to spawn and fight a boss, which all together work together to spawn a massive raid boss for everyone in the entire zone to participate in for some crazy reward potentially. This large boss would have, of course, to probably take a lot of effort to spawn, but I feel it would be an awesome thing to see. If they do extremely sandboxy things like what I just described, I feel like the open world of BDO would be returned to feeling how it used to feel when PvP was what made Sandbox work. But now we have PvE doing the job instead. These kinds of crazy interactive grind spots where players can hop in, join in for the grind, and change how the grind works and how it functions would be an awesome way to see the sandbox of BDO return. And also, I'm just saying, imagine if PvP was also a thing in the open world on top of this crazy PvE sandbox stuff. It could be kind of fun. But that just about covers everything I wanted to say when it comes to PvE. So now we will move on to some PvP topics. First off is the current largest complaint in the PvP scene, which is that players are overly tanky and people are fed up with the air quotes rock meta. Personally, I like the tanky meta. It's an unpopular opinion, I know. A lot of people disagree with me. But my problem with the one-shot meta that existed beforehand comes from the fact that I play Awakening Wizard, which is one of the most immobile classes in the game. And a squishier meta, it makes classes like Awakened Caster, Suck Nova, Guardian, and so on, basically all the slow classes, not fun to play at all. This is because if you play perfectly on those classes in a squishy meta and never have any gaps and don't get CC'd at all, you will usually just die to classes that can outmaneuver you while you're standing up and you're not ever getting CC'd. In my opinion, in BDO, skill expression in PvP can be broken down into two things. First is being able to convert a catch with something like a stiffen into a full combo. The second is being able to properly stay protected and not get CC'd through proper stamina management, cooldown management, and positioning. I feel that in the perfect state of tankiness in PvP, you would not get killed as long as you are standing up, or in other words, not CC'd. The second someone outplays you and catches you is when you should then become vulnerable to actually dying, if that player knows how to convert that catch into a combo. So I implore you, PA, if you're going to take a look at the tank meta, do not make it so we just die while standing up. This makes the less mobile classes innately more difficult and less fun to play. Instead, I suggest changing how down attack and air attack work, or maybe even adding a new form of AP called AP against CC'd targets or something like that. Basically, make us less tanky, but only when we are CC'd. Players should be punished for messing up and getting caught, not for playing their class correctly and leaving no openings. Dying while standing up is one of the most frustrating things when it comes to PvP and BDO. Another issue in PvP is the disparity in guild strength as well as the number of guilds that actively try to participate in Node War and Siege, particularly in the uncapped forms of it. One easy way to fix this is to simply remove the alliance system. Alliances were designed to bolster player numbers so that guilds could more easily meet player caps and nodes. This did work, but it was introduced at a time when PvP player base was much larger, so you had the numbers to allow it to not affect participation as much. In the current state of the game, this is not the case. We currently have a much smaller amount of guilds that are actually trying to participate in wars and not just placing for participation credit. Removing alliances would, in the best case, double the amount of guilds participating in wars. In addition, it would alleviate the guild power disparity as all the strongest players would no longer be able to fit in one or two guilds, as is the current case. You cannot just do this on its own though, as it would reintroduce the problem of hitting player caps being difficult. So alongside this, I recommend reducing player caps to allow guilds to hit them without the need for an alliance. Something like 70 players in Siege, for example, seems reasonable to me. I also wanted to talk about some of the PvP game modes which were added in recent years. These consist both of the War of the Roses and the Hardcore server. While I think both of these game modes are, at least in concept, excellent ideas, I feel like how they were executed was a bit lackluster. When War of the Roses was first revealed, I pictured it working similar to Cyrodiil out of Elder Scrolls Online or World v World in Guild Wars 2. If you don't know what either of those are, imagine a War of the Roses like map, but it is running 24/7, where each faction earns points by holding and capturing objectives. And the faction with the most points by the end of a season would win the war. This is how I feel War of the Roses should have been implemented. Not this short fight that, in all honesty, has almost no strategy in it other than having the two sides blindly run at each other. Sure, in an ideal situation, is that player skill determines which side successfully pushes. But where's the strategy and nuance in how you decide what to attack and how to attack? Everyone just tries to bum rush to the enemy's home node and spawn camp them into oblivion. In these other games, there's so many different types of objectives beyond trying to push your territory forward that can help your faction win the fight. I really do think PA needs to take a look at what other games have done with this form of large scale PvP and take some pointers on what they did to make War of the Roses turn out better. As for the hardcore server, in all honesty, I feel like how it was implemented was really good. It had stuff for everyone. PvE players could grind for good silver. PvP players could actively experience the open world PvP sandbox once again. There are only two things I would really want to see changed for this mode, and first is that I really think we should just allow all classes to be available. Why are we making what was advertised as a competitive game mode with a leaderboard, mind you, that specifically puts players at a disadvantage if they happen to not know how to play any of the classes available in the current season? That was just a bad idea, and if hardcore comes back, I hope to see that changed. The second thing I would want changed is much smaller, and it's just remove the buffs you get from killing mobs. No matter how much you nerf them, it just ruins the supposed competitive nature of the content you created. If you have to keep the buffs, make them specifically give you monster AP and monster damage reduction instead of player damage. I think getting a nice bonus where you can kill mobs a little faster once in a while is nice, but making them you completely unbeatable in PvP just makes it anti-fun. They just shouldn't be a thing. And one last thing I would love to see from PA in terms of PvP is to just bring back the open world PvP sandbox. You don't have to do this by reverting the guild deck changes. As much as I would love for that to happen, I honestly think doing that is a bad idea. But why can't we have some way for guilds to opt in to open world PvP? For example, once upon a time, in a previous ball, PA talked about something called guild tags. Obviously, they have scrapped this idea because of how long ago this was. But this idea allowed you to tag or specialize your guild in a specific form of content like PvP, PvE, or life skilling. Based on your specialization, your guild would gain access to unique passives for the members that would help them in those forms of content. What if PvP tag? What if the PvP tag, for example, on top of some buffs related to PvP, also made it so that your guild could be declared on by other guilds freely? This makes the PvP guilds able to enjoy the PvP they want to participate in. And this isn't the only option, but all I'm saying is please add some way to opt into war or something to allow us to have the PvP sandbox once again. That just about covers everything in PvP, and it brings me to my last topic, which is the current state of pay to win in the game. Let's face it, at the end of the day, PA is a company, and companies exist to make money. Unfortunately, recently PA has started to make this fact more and more apparent with how pay to win has been increasing in prevalence recently. While I hate to see pay to win in the game increasing, and I will always be of the opinion that pay to win should just never exist, it is something that PA is never going to give up. So all I can ask for is that they implement it in a more healthy way for the game. Currently, pay to win has shifted away from outfits and moved to gamble boxes. These boxes allow you to straight up swipe for cronstones, which is a problem. This is because the current endgame grind is for just crons. That's it. That's all you're grinding for at this point. In the past, crons were nice, but the true bottleneck was usually the items themselves. You needed to buy accessories and memory fragments and materials to use to enhance items. So while you could swipe for outfits to get crons, you still needed to sell some of those outfits so you had the silver to buy the items, fragments, and materials you needed. This allowed the people who don't pay to win to benefit from those who do by getting some cheaper crons. The way this worked made it feel just a little bit more reasonable as a pay to win system, but with these gamble boxes, you have completely removed the need to do any of that. Players are now directly allowed to buy progression without any way for those who actually grind to benefit from it. I feel like they need to stop with the gamble boxes or severely limit how many of them you can get. You are just letting players print items used to progress instead of letting them swipe for in game currency and actually participate in the economy. Another thing going on with this whole situation is that the community itself is actively promoting this pay to win, which does kind of irritate me a little bit. There are numerous content creators that actively swipe large amounts of money on stream and in videos to progress and catch up in the game. I will not name and shame anyone, but you know who you are, and I implore you to stop encouraging this. Supporting this kind of shift to pay to win by playing into it actively encourages other players who also pay to win, and also reinforces PA's idea that it's okay to do this pay to win stuff and tells them that this is something that they can do. This will just make pay to win more and more ridiculous and may eventually kill the game if it gets extreme enough. Please consider what you are supporting if you play into this shift that is happening. In summary, pay to win is increasing, and it is increasing in a way that is unhealthy for the game. This is something we as PA's consumers need to make known and hope that they change it. All of this pay to win happening brings up the topic of where is all of this extra money going? And while I do want to keep the information of this video strictly BDO related, we do know that PA has 3 other games they are working on in addition to BDO. That means BDO is single-handedly having to help fund the production of 4 different projects. This it doesn't take a genius to realize that this is not sustainable. And I hope that when these products are completed, maybe BDO will ease up on the pay to win, but one can only hope though. And that just about covers everything I wanted to touch on in this video, guys. In conclusion, BDO is a game I truly love and enjoy. I know a lot of this video was extremely critical of things currently going on in the game and focused mainly on the negatives. So you may think, wow, he hates this game right now, but I promise you that couldn't be further from the truth. If I really didn't like it and didn't care about it and didn't want to play it, I wouldn't even bother making this video or trying to suggest how I feel they can improve it. For the moment, I still find the game fun and I have no plans to stop playing it. And I hope that this video helped further the conversation started by Choices Podcast and that it helped some people understand what is going on with the game right now. BDO is a game I truly want to see succeed, and I hope they try to make changes for the better. As I said at the start, everything in this video is just how I see things, and you shouldn't let me speak for you. So I encourage you to make what you want for the game known. Post a comment, post on Reddit, post on the forums, post in their Discord, and if you agree with any of my opinions, let them know. If we as a community make our wants known, eventually they will hear it. And that's all we can really do. We just have the hope that they're willing to listen. Thanks as always for watching, guys. And as usual, don't forget to check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/blueskyvt. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.